The studio lights blazed down like an interrogation spotlight as Caroline Levit walked onto the sleek stage of the DC Policy Forum. It was one of those high-profile events buzzing with reporters, influencers, political aides, and the usual suspects pretending to be scholars. The atmosphere crackled with that familiar, almost palpable tension, the kind that only comes when two people who genuinely dislike each other are about to clash live on national television. At the center of it all sat Jen Pasaki, legs crossed, her bright red-orange hair glowing under the lights. Her face set in that signature smirk she used whenever she was about to talk down to someone. She faced the crowd, playing them like an expert even before the debate had begun. "We are thrilled to welcome Caroline Levit," Jen announced, drawing out the name like she was introducing a teenager who had somehow managed to sneak into the adults' conversation. A few in the crowd chuckled. Caroline heard it, but didn't flinch. Not a bit. She approached the podium with a crisp navy suit, hair pulled back, her posture so sharp it could slice through stone. Her mere presence shifted the energy in the room. Even the moderator hesitated, sensing an undercurrent of danger. The first question hit like a heavy stone. "Caroline," Jen says, "your generation is too immature for serious politics. What do you have to say to that?" Jen smirked even wider, her eyes glinting with that go-ahead, prove-me-right expression that made half the internet love her and the other half loathe her. Caroline took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch just enough for every camera in the room to edge closer. "Well," she started softly, "it's interesting hearing that from someone who spent years dodging direct answers." A ripple of laughter spread across the audience. But Caroline wasn't done yet. She tilted her body just slightly toward Jen.com, controlled, surgical. "You can mock my age, my generation, my background," she said, her voice unwavering. "But there's one thing you can't mock." Jen raised an eyebrow, feigning amusement. "Oh, do tell." Caroline didn't blink. "The fact that I don't need a binder full of excuses to speak the truth." The room erupted. Cheers, whistles, and gasps filled the air. Jen's smirk faltered just slightly, but it was enough for the cameras to catch. Caroline pressed forward, her words cutting through the clamor like a hot knife. "You think experience is measured by how long you've been behind a podium? Measure it by how many people trust me to speak for them." She let the words hang in the air. The audience erupted again. Jen shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Caroline had landed the first punch clean, sharp, unforgettable. And the night was just getting started. The studio lights blazed even hotter, turning the air into something molten, tightening the tension in the room until every breath felt like part of the show. Jen Pasaki straightened in her chair, crossing one leg over the other, radiating confidence, like a protective shield. She thought she had the room under her control. She always did. Smooth, polished, rehearsed. But across from her sat Caroline Levit, posture rigid, eyes unwavering, waiting. Jen leaned into the microphone, that familiar smirk creeping back into place. "Well, Caroline, it's cute that you think facts work that way," she said, her voice dripping with TV-trained sarcasm. The audience chuckled lightly, but the laugh was thinner than usual. Caroline didn't move. No twitch, no smile, no frown. She watched Jen like a fighter, awaiting the perfect moment to strike. Jen continued, gaining momentum. "You're young, you're new, you're eager, but politics is more complicated than parroting talking points from your boss." Some in the crowd nodded, others fidgeted uneasily. Something about June's tone felt off, too sharp, too smug. Even the moderator stole a glance at Caroline, curious to see how she would respond. Caroline finally leaned forward, her elbows lightly resting on the table. "Jen," she said, her voice calm enough to freeze the room, "you mistake age for wisdom." The audience's reaction was instant. Gasps, cheers, and a few laughs. Jen blinked, rapidly, caught off guard, the smirk slipping away for the first time. Caroline continued, her voice steady and unyielding. "You've spent years crafting narratives for presidents who left the country worse off. And now you sit here lecturing me? Someone who's actually out there, engaging with voters every day about what this country really needs?" Jen tried to cut in, but Caroline effortlessly interrupted. "Do you think I just read talking points?" she asked. "No, I write them. And the reason my generation is stepping up is because the old guard, your guard, ignored the problems for far too long." The crowd erupted into applause. Louder this time, unexpected, swelling like a wave. The camera zoomed in on Jen's face, her jaw clenched, her eyes narrowing, her smile now barely holding together. But Caroline wasn't finished. "You mocked me for being young," she said, her tone unshaken, "but being young isn't a flaw. It's fuel. And America is done being lectured by people who think they're untouchable." The moderator nearly dropped his pen. Jen opened her mouth but quickly closed it again. For the first time, the balance of power at the table shifted. Caroline had seized the moment, and Jen knew it. For several seconds, the studio remained in an eerie, charged silence, waiting for something to break. Even the panelists, usually eager to interrupt, stayed frozen. Jen Pasaki narrowed her eyes, tapping her red pen against her stack of notes. Recalculating, she hadn't expected the 27-year-old press secretary to fire back so quickly. Finally, Jen leaned in, putting on her soft, condescending smirk. "Caroline," she said, "you're very good at sounding confident. I'll give you that. But confidence isn't the same as credibility. Your job, frankly, is to spin things. Mine was to tell the truth." The audience murmured, some nodding in agreement, others scoffing. Caroline remained unfazed. She didn't flinch. She just tilted her head slightly, almost amused. Jen pressed on, sensing momentum. "You work for Trump. That alone makes half the country question anything you say. So tell us, why should Americans believe your version of reality over the facts they see every day?" Caroline smiled slowly and stepped closer to the microphone, like a fighter stepping back into the ring. "Jen," she began, her voice calm but piercing, "you didn't tell the truth. You told a version of it that protected your boss." Jen stiffened. Caroline continued, "You built your entire brand by saying things that sounded polished and harmless. But Americans weren't looking for polished, they were looking for honesty." Caroline took a step closer, her voice now taut like a drawn bowstring. "And you weren't honest." A ripple ran through the crowd. Jen tried to counter. "I was absolutely honest." But Caroline raised her hand, stopping her cold. "You told Americans the border was secure when it wasn't. You told them inflation was temporary when every family could feel it crushing them. You told them Afghanistan was under control just days before chaos erupted on live TV. You didn't give the truth, Jen. You gave talking points." The room hit a fever pitch. A few audience members clapped. Others gasped. Jen blinked, thrown off balance. She attempted a laugh. "You're twisting things." But Caroline cut her off, delivering a line that snapped everyone to attention. "Facts don't change because you say them with a smile." The room exploded. Cheers, whistles, hands slamming, desks. The energy shifted, like someone had just delivered the punchline of the century. Jen's smirk faltered, just enough to be noticeable. Caroline leaned in for the final strike. "You mocked me earlier. You tried to dismiss me. But the truth is, simple, you had the microphone for years, and Americans stopped believing you. Now you're mad because someone else is holding it." The moderator looked back and forth between them, clearly stunned. Caroline stepped back, hands by her sides, owning the stage. Jen Pasaki didn't speak. She couldn't, because in that moment, it was clear to everyone watching, Caroline had taken the room, and she wasn't giving it back. The atmosphere shifted so sharply that even the producers behind the glass seemed frozen. Jen Pasaki, trying desperately to maintain her polished MSNBC composure, leaned back in her chair, her half-smile now looking more brittle than ever. She shuffled her papers, crossed her leg, and tried to counter. "Caroline," she said with exaggerated faux concern, "this is exactly the kind of oversimplified rhetoric that divides the country. You take every issue and flatten it into a cheap talking point. So what happens when people with no policy background try to sound like experts?" The liberal side of the audience clapped quickly, hoping to shift the momentum back to Jen. But Caroline stayed still, unshaken. She tilted her head slightly, calm and almost amused. "Jen," she replied coolly, "you helped run the most chaotic administration in modern history. You briefed a press while pretending everything was under control. You don't get to lecture anyone on expertise." The room erupted into applause and gasps. Jen blinked hard, clearly surprised by the direct hit. "That's cute," she snapped, "but you have no idea what it means to handle real pressure." Caroline took a step forward, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Real pressure?" she asked. "You mean lying for Biden? Explaining away inflation? Pretending the border wasn't a crisis? Telling Americans the economy was strong while families couldn't afford eggs?" "Yes, Jen, I'm familiar with the pressure you call leadership." The audience roared, this time louder and more unified. Jen's jaw clenched, and she tried again. "You're twisting everything for drama." "Jen." Caroline froze for a second, her expression becoming still. Then, she leaned in again, her voice low and precise. "I'm 27, and I've already done something you never could. I tell the truth without needing to spin it." The room exploded. Cheers, whistles, chants. Jen's face flushed red. The moderator shifted nervously. Caroline continued, her tone steady and unyielding. "You call me dramatic, but the only people who think facts are drama are the ones who don't want to face them. You mocked the border crisis until it hurt your poll numbers. You mocked inflation until Americans couldn't fill their tanks. And now you mock me because it's easier than admitting your administration failed." The crowd leaped to its feet. Cameras zoomed in. Twitter would explode in minutes. Jen Pasaki opened her mouth to respond, but the moment had already passed. Caroline owned the room, and everyone knew it. Jen had expected Caroline to crumble, her tight, smug smile revealing that she thought she had already won. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and tilted her head as if preparing for one final blow. "So let me get this straight," Jen said with dripping condescension. "You're telling the American people that you a 27-year-old press secretary, understand policy better than senior strategists, analysts, and cabinet members. Really? The panel chuckled, and a few audience members laughed along. Jen smirked, thinking this would be her chance to regain control. Caroline didn't flinch. She didn't smile, didn't frown. She simply leaned forward, her hands resting firmly on the desk, eyes sharp and unyielding. The room quieted. Not because of her words, but because everyone knew something was coming. "Jen," she said, voice calm, "age doesn't determine competence. Performance does. And based on what Americans have seen the last few years, I'd be careful bringing competence into this conversation." A wave of gasps rippled through the room. Jen blinked, caught completely off guard. Caroline continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "You mocked me for being young. Fine, but here's the truth you don't want to admit. My generation inherited the problems your generation created. High inflation, border chaos, unsafe cities, broken schools. And instead of fixing any of it, you mock the people trying to clean up the mess." The panel sat still. The audience leaned forward in anticipation. Jen attempted to laugh it off. "Come on." But Caroline cut her off, her tone unwavering, sharp, and undeniably confident. "You ask if I understand policy better than senior strategists?" she said. "Well, considering the state of this country, that bar isn't exactly high." The crowd erupted. Cheers, whistles, applause burst through the studio like shockwaves. Even the camera crew seemed caught off guard. The moment was too powerful to ignore. Jen straightened, visibly rattled. Caroline didn't give an inch. "You want to talk about experience?" she continued. "Experience doesn't mean repeating the same failures for 20 years. Experience doesn't mean much when the results speak for themselves." She leaned in slightly, delivering the blow that would trend for the next 24 hours. "You tried to mock me, Jen, but the difference between us is simple. I answered to the American people. You answered to whatever political machine needed you." That week, the studio exploded again, louder, sharper, almost shaking. Jen's face turned red. Her smile vanished. Her confidence evaporated in seconds. The panel sat frozen, knowing they had just witnessed the moment Jen Pasaki lost control of her own show. Caroline didn't gloat, didn't grin. She simply leaned back, composed, unbothered, fully in control of the room. She wasn't supposed to own, in that moment. Everyone, viewers, panelists, even Jen herself, realized the truth. Caroline Levit wasn't just defending herself. She was rewriting the power dynamics of the entire panel, and Jen couldn't stop it. Jen Pasaki leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs with that familiar "I've got this under control" smirk. She perfected at the White House podium. The audience saw it, the panelists saw it, and so did Caroline. Jen tapped her pen lightly against her notepad, pretending to analyze, but it was clear she was preparing her next move. Caroline, unflinching, began in that polished, patronizing tone. "You keep repeating talking points that don't reflect reality. Facts matter, data matters, experience matters, and frankly, you're lacking all three." The liberal half of the audience chuckled, but it didn't feel genuine. It sounded rehearsed, like a canned laugh track. Caroline didn't budge. Her expression remained calm, almost amused, as if she had been waiting for Jen to walk straight into the trap. "Jen," Caroline said, tilting her head slightly, "you keep saying facts matter, but you haven't used a single one. Not one. So I'll help you." The laughter evaporated. Jen blinked. Caroline continued, voice steady but edged like steel. "You talk about experience, but your experience was standing at a podium telling Americans everything was fine when it wasn't. You told parents schools were safe when they were closed. You told the country inflation was temporary. You told Americans the border was secure while cities drowned under the crisis." A stir moved through the audience. Even the neutral panelists leaned back, impressed. Jen forced a smile. "Those issues are complex." Caroline cut her off with surgical precision. "No, Jen. They're simple. You said things that weren't true, and when people questioned you, you spun it into political poetry. Pretty words, zero solutions." The crowd erupted applause, whistles, and shouts of "exactly." Jen raised her hand, trying to regain control. "Caroline, you don't understand the pressures of that job." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Caroline replied, stepping forward. "You used the press room like a shield. I use my platform like a window. Transparency, Jen, something you never mastered?" Jen's smile faded completely. Caroline delivered the blow that froze the entire panel. "You say I lack experience? Maybe, but I've never stood at a podium and lied to millions of Americans. That takes a very special kind of experience, and I'm proud I don't have it." The audience roared. Even the cameras seemed to zoom in on Pasaki's stunned expression. Jen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Caroline folded her hands, calm and collected, as the studio shook with applause. She wasn't just winning. She was rewriting the entire power dynamic of the panel. The panel tried to reset after the explosive exchange, but the atmosphere had shifted. Everyone could feel it. Viewers at home felt it. Even the producers behind the glass stared at their monitors, waiting for the next hit. Jen adjusted her microphone, forcing a smile that now seemed more like a shield than a sign of confidence. "Caroline," Jen began, her voice dripping with familiar DC condescension. "You're very passionate, but passion doesn't replace experience, and it certainly doesn't excuse misinformation." The word misinformation triggered quiet groans across the audience. Caroline heard it. Jen definitely heard it. Caroline didn't rush. She let the silence stretch, just enough for the tension to thicken the air before stepping forward with calm, lethal precision. "Jen," she said softly, "whenever you're losing an argument, you hide behind that word. It's your safety blanket." The room ignited. Laughter, applause, even a few whistles. Jen blinked, caught off guard. Caroline continued, her tone unwavering. "You lecture everyone about accuracy, but you spent years telling the country the border was secure. INFLATION was transitory, and the Afghanistan withdrawal was a success. So, forgive me if I don't take lessons on truth from you." The audience exploded again, louder this time, and Jen's smile snapped into something tight and brittle. She tried to recover. "I'm not here to argue feelings." "Exactly," Caroline cut in. "Because feelings aren't your problem. Facts are." Another eruption. Jen's cheeks flushed. Caroline stepped closer, lowering her voice enough to make the entire room lean in. "You tried to mock me? You tried to belittle me? But the one thing you forgot," she said, pointing gently toward the audience, "is that these people aren't stupid. They see what's happening to their families, their cities, their economy, and no polished press conference can hide that." Jen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Caroline delivered the final blow. "You wanted a moment, Jen?" she asked. "Congratulations. You just gave it to me." The audience roared, standing and clapping, flooding the studio with noise so loud that the moderators had to cut to commercial early. Jen stared ahead, stunned. And in that instant, the entire room knew Caroline had won. The moderator barely had time to reset before Caroline stepped forward again, the lights catching the edge of her blazer like she was walking into a championship round. Jen Pasaki tried to keep her signature confident smirk, but the tremor in her eyes said it all. Caroline had taken the room, and she wasn't giving any of it back. Jen leaned into her mic. "You know, Caroline, it's easy to come here with rehearsed talking points and act like you're the voice of the people. But the truth is," Caroline cut in, her tone steady and lethal, "no, Jen. The truth is you don't like that someone younger than you. Someone you can't control. Someone who doesn't fold under pressure, can challenge your narrative." The crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, even whistles. Jen blinked twice, thrown off. Caroline didn't wait. "You spent years spinning press briefings like they were theater. You talked in circles, avoided every real question, and treated the American public like they couldn't see through it. That's not communication. That's manipulation." Jen sat back, her smirk fading fast. "And now," Caroline continued, "you try to mock me because you think it'll work the way it works on your talk shows. This isn't your studio. This isn't your friendly audience. This is real America watching you crumble." A wave of applause rolled across the room. Jen tried interrupting. "Caroline, don't flatter yourself." But Caroline stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to make the moment hit harder. "I'm not flattering myself, Jen. I'm reminding you that the era where you controlled the message is over." The moderators froze. Jen froze. Even the cameras seemed to tighten their focus. Then Caroline delivered the final blow. "You tried to mock me tonight, but all you did was prove why people stopped trusting your version of truth." The audience stood loud, unified, electric. Jen stared ahead, her expression hollow, searching for a comeback that simply didn't exist. And in that moment, it was undeniable. Caroline hadn't just won the exchange. She'd owned the entire room.